Hey YouTube, it's your beekeeper here. It is the middle of September 2019. Let's go ahead and do an update on this homemade Yamasaw, affectionately known as the Yamasaw. It's a band mill slash sawmill project that's been many years in the making, has stalled for probably as many years. Actually, it's probably stalled and sat much longer than it's actually been worked on. But that's the way life goes sometimes, and this project was never intended to be a quick turnaround. It was just kind of a fun thing that I kind of dreamt up to be able to think outside of the box, to be able to make a sawmill, which would be extremely functional to me, and not really have any components of this sawmill be anything at all, which started its life as a sawmill, if that makes sense, except for the blade. I'm not quite sharp enough. You see what I did there? I'm not quite sharp enough to fabricate a blade on my own. So that was purchased, but everything else is obviously, by looking at this video, nothing to do with the sawmill. What I'm doing here is tensioning the overhead springs. If you're new to this project, or if you don't remember because it's been 4 or 5 years, about 5 years I think, since I bought this bike, I used two 30-inch overhead garage door springs and cables to create buoyancy with this deck. It's not to raise and lower the deck per se, but it's to get it kind of weight neutral. And since the cables that are coming down to lift the cutting deck are actually garage door cables, they're really long, so I was able to bring them down to the deck. I put a pulley down on the deck and brought it back up and connected it to the top of the frame so it's compounded. I've got these springs set at 7.5 turns per spring. Seems to be about right. These springs came off of a two-car, it was either 14 or 16-foot wide wooden garage door that was being demolished, and a friend of mine worked for an overhead garage door company, and he gave me the springs. So I think they had 10 or 11 twists per. So for this, which is pretty heavy, oh yeah, oh hey, check this out. So there's the alternator. I had a charging issue, which didn't surprise me. It concerned me, but didn't surprise me. The onboard stator just did not have enough amperage to keep up with the draw of that 18 or 19 amp cooling fan that we're using. I also added some more shrouding on this side here. I used an old stop sign because I had run out of that thin sheet metal and I just was tired of dilly-dallying around with this project. So the shrouding works really, really well. The one on the other side, the stop sign, is removable. I use self-tapping screws. So in the event I need to access the ignition coils or access the carburetor on that side, it's easy enough to get to. I put little magnets on the end of those flappers. Those flappers didn't balance out right. I think just with it being out in the weather, they never opened when you started it. But I digress. I had charging issues, so I dug around in my hoard and I found this 60 amp 3-wire Chevy alternator. And it's easy, right? The main terminal bolt on the back goes to the battery. That's your charging. The blade of the two blades where the Molex plugs in, one goes to a light. You see the orange turn signal light is now the charge indicating light. That would be the alternator light on the dash of your car. And I just decided to use, actually Skippy was helping me do this wiring. We decided to just use the onboard light. If the light's on, you're not producing 12 volts. When the light shuts off, you'll see here when it starts, the light will shut off, and the neutral light works, of course. The second wire on that plug is the exciter, or it just needs to sense 12 volts, and then the alternator will produce a charge. So the only drawback to this, and the reason why I had to do it this way, is because light goes right out. The only drawback to this is that the battery only charges when the wheels are spinning, which isn't necessarily a drawback. 80% of the time this engine is running, the wheels are going to be spinning. I don't imagine it's sitting around idle. And then using a big fat car battery like that, the charge on the battery, that's the word I'm looking for, can run that fan for quite some time without any significant drop in voltage. But right now it runs it at about 13 volts. Now it's not spinning as fast as it probably would be in a car, even at idle. But again, the only moving parts on this bike that are exposed are the wheels. And I use the front wheel because it's the biggest wheel and it will create the most RPM at the alternator. There's nothing I could tap off of on the engine that would spin that alternator, which again, it's fine. It is what it is. Skippy wanted to contribute, so we used an 1.5-inch threaded coupler. He ran it down the lathe and smoothed it out, got all the casting seams and everything and the bell off of it. 12.5 volts is with the fan running and the blade running at 35 miles an hour there. I don't know how fast this blade has to spin to start doing cuts, but I suspect it's going to spin a little bit faster. So 12.8 with the fan running, 12.9 there. I'm very, very happy that we're on the increasing side of voltage for the battery. But Skippy lathed that 1.5-inch coupler. He knurled it, so there's a bit of a grip to it. I fit some big fat bearing plate, 2 bearing plate washers into the, I cut them on the lathe and I got them to fit just on the inside of that coupler, and I welded it and slid it, removed the pulley, there you go, stuck it on, bolted it in, it runs like a champ. It's awesome, 60 amp. And then for tension, I just put that spring, that brake spring, you see it's pulling it into the tire. And it works. I don't know, man. This is just dumb enough to work. You remember this was, I think I built the trailer, the log bed trailer in 2011, 2012. And then about 4.5, 5 years ago, I brought this motorcycle home and built the framework out of an old squat rack. I've got a bunch of, see the turn signal light there comes on, and I do this several times just because it's fun to watch that bulb. I had originally intended to put a voltmeter on this thing, but it doesn't really matter to me. As long as the light's out, I know we're at least putting some voltage back into the battery. There you go. And it comes right out as soon as we're on the positive side of the charging system there. See now that it's slowing down. It's awesome. Oh, and then that box there, I don't know that you've seen that. That's an old Intermatic light timer box, the T104, that had failed. It was in one of the buildings that I'd worked for, and I threw the guts of it away because that had failed, and then I just used the box. It's not watertight, but it doesn't matter because nothing is watertight on this box, really. That's the fan switch. Turn the fan off. The one on the right is the ignition. And it's awesome. So it's ready to, and this is me just running it. I ran this thing for probably 30 minutes straight with the fan running. I wanted to make sure all the gauges of the wires were correctly sized, that the fan wires weren't going to get warm, that the charging wire off the alternator wasn't going to get warm. And it's awesome. I think it's going to be a challenge here in town to get this sawmill into the back of the pickup, because it's got to weigh 500 pounds, I would suspect. The motorcycle itself was pretty heavy, and in reality the only weight I lifted off of it was pulling the front end off and removing the seat, which is nothing, right? But now we've got so much other steel around it. I'm hoping I can utilize the cherry picker to some degree to probably not completely lift this thing up, but at least help manage to get this into the back of the truck. But that's a whole nother process. But this is pretty exciting. This thing is done. It's ready to go up to El Rancho and start making some boards. The only thing I do have to do is weld the skis on. I don't know if you remember, there was a video several videos ago where I put the wheels in the 2x2, I think it is, 2x2 square steel. They're 48 inches long. They are actually going to be the skis, I'll just call them skis, that run down the channels of the log bed trailer. I didn't want to attach them yet for a couple of reasons. First of all, it would make it extremely clumsy and cumbersome to get it in and out of the truck and up to the ranch. And secondly, I really wasn't sure where the center of gravity of this cutting deck would land. So I wanted it to be complete. I wanted to know where all the weight was going to be, and then I will move the skis, position the skis accordingly on this cutting deck to make sure it's got a good balance to it so we don't push it over, especially when the blades are higher. And the blade unit is higher. And yeah, here we go, 7.5. So stay tuned for the ranch trip video. I'm hoping to get up there in the next week or two. and I'm hoping to throw a log on the deck. Thanks for watching. Gotta go, gotta run. See ya!